How's it going, guys? CotC here, and today I'm going to be running you guys through everything you need to know about buffs and debuffs in Octopath Traveler Champions of the Continent. Hopefully by the end of this video you'll have a better understanding of how to best optimize your buff and debuff usage throughout your fights, as well as use this knowledge to craft your teams. Let's get right into it. The first and most basic detail to know about buffs and debuffs is the 30% cap. Buffs and debuffs that use numerical values stack additively up to 30%. Simple, right? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. Buffs and debuffs are each split up into several different categories, which each have their own individual 30% cap. So first, let's take a look at the different kinds of buffs. The first and most common kind of buff you'll encounter are skill-based buffs. As the name would imply, these buffs are applied by your character's skills. A couple examples of these include Iris's team-wide 15% attack up, or Mabel's team-wide 15% magic and magic defense up. The way buffs can be stacked is very simple. Just use them both on the same unit or the same set of units, and both their potency and their durations will stack. For example, one of Fior's starting skills gives her 3 turns of 15% attack and defense up. If I use this alongside with Iris's team-wide buff, which gives 2 turns of 15% attack up, this will result in Fior having 5 turns of 30% attack up. The potencies will add up to the full 30% for the entire 5-turn duration, so you don't have to worry about juggling the durations of the different sources. All you need to do is look at the buff icon to see how many turns are remaining, and any additional attack up buffs that you cast afterward will increase the duration even further. You can even stack 2 skills from the same unit, such as using Mina's 10% front row defense up and 15% front row defense up skills to give the entire team 25% defense up. A hilarious thing that you can do is that you can even stack the exact same skill from 2 different units. For example, Primrose and Glossom both have a skill that gives the full front row 20% attack and defense up, and both of those skills have the exact same name. But since they're from different sources, they stack just like any other 2 skills. Do note that using the exact same skill from the same unit twice in a row will just result in the duration getting increased. This category of buffs is split further into subcategories when you consider the difference between regular attack or defense up and attack or defense up regarding a specific weapon or element. One perfect example of this is Teo's team-wide Regen, which also grants 20% wind defense up. It's possible for a unit to have 30% magic defense up and 30% wind defense up at the same time, which will make incoming wind damage do even less. While I don't believe there are currently any skills in the game that apply attack up of a specific weapon or elemental type, there will be later on, and they do stack on top of regular attack or magic up with their own 30% cap. Next we have passive-based buffs, which are applied by passives. You can distinguish these from skill-based buffs due to the white border around their buff icon. A couple examples of this type of buff are Fior gaining 20% attack up for 3 turns at the start of battle, and Lynette granting 10% to all front row allies each time she swaps rows. Just like skill-based buffs, the potency of passive-based buffs can be stacked up to 30%, and their durations will stack as well. If Lynette swaps rows on turn 1, Fior will now have 30% attack up that lasts 4 turns, instead of just a 20% attack up that lasts 3. This is just one of the many powerful things that you can do with Lynette, so stay tuned for the Lynette guide, which will be the next video I upload on the channel after this one. Next we have the damage up category, which includes passive buffs of a specific weapon or element, as well as conditional damage up buffs that only become active when certain conditions are met. The most common instances of these are found on Scholars, who commonly have a passive that gives themselves damage up in a specific element, such as Sophia giving herself 30% ice damage up. Another example of such a passive is Fior granting herself 20% sword damage up while she's at full HP. Additionally, there are also accessories that give weapon or element attack up. Job emblems, such as the Warrior's Emblem, give a small percentage of damage up in a certain weapon type, in this case swords, while elemental runes, such as Ice Rune 1, give a small percent damage boost to specific types of magic. Since this subcategory also has its own 30% cap, this means that characters like Sophia do not benefit from items like Ice Runes, since her own passive already hits the 30% cap by itself. This is why Sophia and Azlight in the same row doesn't actually do anything. Azlight's passive would normally boost Sophia's ice damage by 20%, but she's already hitting the 30% cap by herself. You can instead throw an Ice Rune on Azlight to increase her damage, since she's not at the cap yet. Another detail that's very important to know about this particular category of buff is that all passives that have the words damage up all fall under this category, and therefore share the same 30% cap. For example, instead of putting Azlight behind Sophia, let's put Wingate instead. Wingate's passive reads that while he's in the back row, the ally in front of him gets 20% damage up against enemies in break. However, if Sophia uses Ice Magic against an enemy in break, you'll notice that it doesn't do any more damage than if Sophia had literally anyone else behind her. She's already reaching the damage up cap via her own passive, so Wingate's passive does nothing. Let's take a look at another example, Scarecrow plus Wingate. His first passive gives 20% damage up against enemies in break, which is the exact same passive as Wingate. While Wingate is behind Scarecrow attacking an enemy in break, you'll notice that he only gets a 30% increase in damage rather than 40% due to hitting the cap. Hypothetically, if you were to equip Scarecrow with a skilled Hunter's Emblem, which is an accessory that gives him 10% bow damage up, this means that Scarecrow could hit the 30% damage cap up by himself, and Wingate being in the back row would do absolutely nothing. Additionally, there's one more type of buff to know about, even though it's not in the game yet and won't be in the game for quite a while, as this gives context to why characters like Lynette and Pia are so powerful later on in the game's lifespan, and that is special-based buffs. As the name implies, these are buffs applied by a character's special skill. As an example, let's take a look at Pia's special at level 10. It applies an AoE taunt and also gives all front row allies 20% attack and speed up for 3 turns. Special-based buffs have a few special properties. They have their own separate cap outside of the buffs that we have already gone over, but they also do not stack in duration despite having the same buff icon. As an example, let's take the earlier mentioned Fior and Iris buffs, which gave a combined 30% attack up for 5 turns. If we apply Pia's special on top of that, Fior will have a total 50% attack up. However, the 20% from Pia's special only lasts for 3 turns, and once those 3 turns are up, Fior will go back to having just 30% attack up. Another peculiar thing about special-based buffs is that they do not stack in potency with each other, but they do stack in duration. One example is Iris and Evelyn's specials, which both give attack up. When both are applied, their values do not add to each other, but they will add up their durations for up to 4 turns total of attack up. Next, let's take a quick look at another buff, Regen. When multiple characters apply regens, the strongest regen is the one that takes precedence, but durations can stack just like buffs that affect stats. For example, if Teo casts a strong regen that lasts for 5 turns, and then Cedric casts his heal plus regen skill, which grants 2 turns of regen, the result will be 7 total turns of regen, with the effectiveness going off of Teo's since his is stronger. Some special skills can also apply regen. In this case, their durations do not stack with normal regens, just like how stat buffs applied by special skills have their own duration. But the actual healing does in fact stack. This potentially allows for characters to have a couple of turns where they're regenning for several thousands of HP. Now let's take a look at debuffs. Debuffs work in pretty much the same way as buffs. There are debuffs applied by skills and debuffs applied by passives, which are also each split into generic stat debuffs and weapon or element specific debuffs, all of which each have their own 30% cap. Special skills that apply debuffs will also have their own separate cap, just like buffs, which is what makes several lower rarity characters a lot more usable, such as Nana. There is one particular character whose special skill is crazy powerful in comparison to the rest of their kit, so much so that players bring them exclusively to use their special, and you probably won't guess who it is. It's actually Billy, the 3-star thief, whose special can apply up to 20% physical defense and speed down to all enemies for 3 turns. Alright, now that we've gone over buffs and debuffs, let's take a look at an example and put everything we learned into practice. In this clip, I'm fighting against the battle-tested sword NPC, who is not currently available in English, but will eventually show up in Shepherd's Rock. The unit that we're looking at here is Cyrus. While he isn't out in English yet, we'll be using him as our example because he can deal a ton of damage and big numbers are cool. As our control, let's first see how much damage Cyrus deals without any buffs or debuffs whatsoever, with just the break and weakness bonuses. Cyrus's passive innately gives him 20% fire, ice, and lightning damage up, which is all we're going to be using for our control numbers. We'll be equipping an Ice Rune 2 accessory to give him the extra 10% ice damage up needed to hit the 30% damage up cap. There is one other unit not currently available in English that we'll be using in this setup, Eliza, whom you might recognize from Honnet's story in the original Octopath Traveler. Her passive gives both herself and her ally in the same row 20% magic up while she's at full HP. We'll be parking her behind Cyrus so that he can benefit from that passive the whole time. Now let's take a look at everyone else's kit. On the buff side, we're going to be using Lynette's 20% magic up and Cyrus's own skill that gives him 15% magic up. This caps us at the maximum of 30% skill-based buff. For passive-based buffs, we have Eliza's 20% magic up and Lynette's 10% magic up applied upon switching rows, which caps us out at 30%. For special-based buffs, we'll be using Lynette's special skill at 10%, which gives 20% magic up. On the debuff side, we have 30% magic defense down through a combination of Viola's anti-guard and Lynette's 3-hit fan skill. Additionally, Sophia and Azlight will be inflicting a total of 30% ice defense down. For passive debuffs, we have Laura's passive inflicting 15% magic defense down for 3 turns, on top of an Awakening 4 accessory for one of the arena champions, Varkin, that won't be available in English for quite a long time, but it inflicts another 15% magic down for 6 turns, resulting in a total of 9 turns of 30% passive magic defense down. On top of that, Azlight will be the one initiating the break in this setup, using her passive to inflict 15% passive ice defense down. The break itself will be initiated using level 10 Azlight special skill, which inflicts 10% special-based ice defense down. To top it all off, we're going to have Jose, that's right, the 3-star cleric, use his special to inflict 10% magic defense down. Alright, now that everything is set up, let's take a look at what our damage looks like now. Now obviously, this is a scenario that is set up specifically to maximize the buffs and debuffs. However, the point of this was to show just how far you can take your damage if you properly utilize those buffs and debuffs. In theory, this exact setup could be brought to a real boss fight that's weak to ice, and you would get results like this. Now I'm sure some of you are asking, should I use a buff or debuff in X situation? Which one's better? To which, you can't really come up with an objective answer. All of these buffs and debuffs are based on percentages, percent defense down, percent attack up, etc. And it's entirely dependent on the factors of each fight. Who are you using? What level are they? What do they have equipped? And what enemy are you going against? There's just too many factors to say that there's one correct answer for all situations if you have to choose between a buff or a debuff in a specific instance. And that concludes my guide on buffs and debuffs. I know it was a lot of numbers and whatnot, so feel free to watch through the video again until you have a good understanding of the system. I highly encourage going out and trying to craft some teams for yourself with this new information in mind, as getting first-hand experience is the best way to learn how everything works. Up next will be the long-awaited Lynette guide, so I hope you are all excited for that. Thanks for watching everyone, and until next time, this has been CotC. See ya!